So let me just get started. One of the things that's funny, Kim Metcalf is at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He's our board chair this year. And there was also a faculty member at UNLV, a guy named Hal Rothman. Are there any UNLV folks in the room? Yay! Rebels, go Rebels. Isn't it interesting to watch all the college t-shirts at the betting? There's some juxtaposition about seeing those two things together. I'm thinking higher ed, sports betting. Anyway, that's another keynote. But you know, Hal was an expert on Las Vegas, and one of the things he said was that Las Vegas isn't concerned about what we were yesterday or what we are today. It's tomorrow that entices us. And you know, certainly I think you're celebrating your 30th anniversary. Congratulations. And also thinking about the space that you all hold, you really do push the profession forward. You're not the weakest link, by the way, even though that's up on the screen. What the weakest link is, allegedly, are colleges of teacher education. And so I want to talk a little bit about that for a minute because, you know, as David said, I have the opportunity to travel around the country a great deal. I literally am on a plane, it feels like almost once a week, going all across the country and talking to folks like you about what's happening in teacher education. And about probably 8 or 9 months ago, Mark Tucker, some of you know who Mark is, he blogged about how teacher education is the weakest link. And you know, I got to tell you, that was something that none of us were happy about. It is something that, you know, we hear a lot. And it's interesting because, right, so when I travel to campuses. I don't just talk to folks like you. I actually talk to teacher candidates. In a couple of weeks, it might even be next week, I'm going to the University of Southern Indiana. And I will be speaking as part of Ron Rashan. He's a former College of Ed dean who's now president of University of Southern Indiana. And I'll be sitting down with teacher candidates just to talk to them about, you know, what's their lived experience, right? What does it feel like to be moving into the profession now? One of the things that I would love to see at AACTE is to have more teacher candidates at AACTE. We had a closing panel at AACTE that was about millennials, and my team members who are millennials said, Lynn, you know, it was a little odd that you had 2 baby boomers up on the stage talking about millennials, but none of us were there. They were right. And so we need to practice what we preach as educators, right, and bring them into the fold. But you know, I know we're not the weakest link. When I was at the University of San Diego, I had a chance to sit in on some classes. I sat in on 2 classes that were looking to, for dual certification in general education and special education. And the other thing I did was I got to visit with the Jacobs Institute for Innovation in Education. And I want to read to you what their commitment is. That the seeds of innovation are planted at a young age, and technological advances provide learners of all ages the opportunity to be creators, builders, designers, producers, and makers. That's not a weak link. That's actually a really strong link. And what I would say is people around the country talk about, oh, teachers' colleges are so awful, right? That you're not. That part of what we need to do is really to amplify the work. You know, we had a couple of responses to those blogs. I mean, first of all, there was this notion that we don't have tough admission standards. You know, and candidly, I was just home in Denver, and I just heard the University of Denver is no longer requiring, you know, standardized tests for admissions. I think there's a rethinking right now of what quality means and how we're bringing individuals into higher education in general and into teacher education more specifically. But we have had standards. But we also know that there's a tension, right? Because we also know that we want to really build out the teaching profession and bring in more students because our enrollments are declining. And, you know, so how we do that creatively and how we do that in ways that honor the diversity that we want to see in our profession, I think, is really important, but it's not weak. It's thoughtful. It's really thinking about how do we build the profession. You know, one of the responders to Mark Tucker was actually a teacher who was in clinical practice, and I want to read to you her quote. She said, I was right in the trenches working alongside experienced teachers, learning from them and sharing ideas and building critical relationships with students. I learned skills that could not be taught in the college classroom. Empathy. And empathy we know is really important, right, in design thinking, right? Empathy, differentiation for students with diverse needs, building connections with families, work ethic for the long hours that it takes to become a teacher. The profession and our education are not weak. And that was from a teacher candidate. And there are times when I think that, it's from those students and those candidates that we get the best voice in terms of what's happening in the profession, right? We don't do this for ourselves, right? We do it because we love our students and we believe in the transformative power of education. And it's ironic, right, that remember that television show, The Weakest Link? Like, it didn't really last very long. And I think that if you want to think about maybe comparing teacher education to a game show, I would think about Jeopardy, right? Long run, really smart. Oftentimes, teachers and students are a big part of Jeopardy. And so did you know that this year it's 55 years since Jeopardy has been around? Isn't that astonishing? I'd like to think I'm not older than that, but we'll move on. Anyway, so we know that teacher education is in some jeopardy, right? We know that. And we have heard a lot of it. Our teacher shortages are critical. But I often say, and you all do this as well, we have to disaggregate the data, right? We have teacher shortages, but we have shortages inside of shortages. So we need to make sure that we're paying attention to education technology, to special education, to English language learners, right? It's astonishing to me. We're doing more work in special education right now in AACTE, and the minuscule number of special ed instructors at colleges and universities and even smaller number of teachers is astonishing to me. It's such a high need area. So part of what we want to do is to focus on some of those shortage areas. But we have teacher shortages, we have attrition. We've been talking at AACTE about whether or not we need to be doing more work with induction. We see so many of our students coming through our programs and then moving into school districts, and then we lose them. And so what do we need to do to reclaim some of that space in induction? Shortages of diverse candidates. I'm going to go through some statistics with you, and if the poll works, it works, and if it doesn't, we're just going to shout it out. And then legislative pressures. One of the things that I say a lot of times is, and I actually was just talking to a group from the Association of American Architects. And I said, just because I live in a house doesn't mean you want me to build it. And just because you've been educated doesn't mean you know how to educate. Right? I mean, there's this notion that because we've been through school, and I think for better or for worse, some of our elected officials have this, right? That just because you've been through school means you know how to do our work. And our work actually is theory and practice and research-based. It's not just because you went to school. So as you can see, David said I get a little defensive maybe, or let's say I just like to protect. I think we need to both protect what we know and push ourselves to be the best profession, right? I think we need to kind of work within that tension. All right, so I have a poll question, because what I want to talk about now is this first study, Colleges of Education, a national report. How many of you have seen this study? A handful. Well, hopefully you're AACTE members, because if you are, then you have a chance to download this free from our website. But this is actually quite an interesting study, because what it looks at is it looks at the history of colleges of education. Did you know that there was no history of colleges of education that we could find? I was actually astonished at that. We could not find anyone who had written about the history of colleges of education in the US. So we do a little bit of that, and we get through some statistics. Please, go ahead and download that. We also did a supplement, most recently, that looks at education, students, and diversity. So this is part of a research portfolio that we're moving out at AACTE so that you know that you can regularly expect from us information that you need to work inside of your institutions with elected officials. And so I'm going to ask you a question, and you're going to give me a minute to see if I can actually pull up Slido. And if I can't, you will have mercy on me. So let me ask you this. Do you know what percentage of people of color earn undergraduate degrees and certificates? How many of you think 10%? 15? Down? It's actually, right now we know that 52% of students in public schools are students of color, and there are less than 25% of our candidates who are of color. And you know, that disproportionality is a real challenge. What we've been trying to do is to focus on this more intently at AACTE, and so part of what we're doing is next year's conference is called Disrupting Inequities, and there will be a big piece of the conference that's going to look at what we're doing to diversify the profession. So how we, I think, show up around this topic is incredibly important. I think there's the way in which we have to remember that most of our public schools at this point really are educating students who don't have quote-unquote choice, right? Who don't have the resources and the privilege of going to a private school. We have to really think about what's happening in our profession and how it is that we're building up the diversity of the profession. And for me, this is one of the most important things that we can do. So here is a survey that actually shows, interestingly, you can see the fourth one, high school teachers, right, are the fourth underneath nurses, medical doctors, and pharmacists for honesty and ethics in professions. So people think highly of teachers. They think highly of who we are. What you don't see there are the lowest. I bet you wonder who those are. Lawyers? You know, it's funny, when I left DC and moved to Denver, I thought I would encounter fewer lawyers, and then I found out that Denver was a federal center, and so I still hung out with lawyers. But lawyers, and then the lowest are, historically, car salespeople. And who do you think, what do you think is another category that's the lowest? Anyone? Politicians, exactly. Yes, members of Congress are the lowest. So there you go. You know, one of the things that we look at every year is the PDK poll. And the PDK poll just celebrated their 50th anniversary. And in that 50th anniversary, they asked questions about interest in teaching. So let me just tell you what some of the findings were. 2/3 of Americans thought that teachers were unpaid. An overwhelming 78% of parents of public school students said that they would support teachers going on strike. Now, I always find this interesting because part of the challenge we have is that it's taxpayer dollars that pay teacher salaries, right? And we've been in a very much an anti-taxing kind of a mode. And so when people say to me, well, look at nursing, they've done so well. And I say, well, nurses don't rely on tax dollars, right, to support their salaries, but teachers do. But so parents would support teachers in striking. When they asked the question, what would you like one of your children, would you like one of your children to become a public school teacher? Now, this was for the first time ever in the 50 years of the poll, 54% of parents said they would not want their child to become a teacher. That's down from 70% saying yes only 10 years ago. So to put it another way, 50 years ago, 3 out of 4 parents approved of their children choosing to become teachers, and today it's less than half. So part of what we do is work with government officials. And you know that they change a lot, right? In some states, there are term limits. In Colorado, there are term limits on elected officials. In other states, there are not. Certainly in the federal government, there aren't, although many people would like to see that. So part of what happened in the recent elections, as you know, is the House shifted from Republican to Democratic. And that then means some shifts for us as well. Although it's interesting to see, we just saw President Trump sign an executive order linking research dollars and freedom of speech. And so if an institution, if a public institution is found to not allow its students to exercise full freedom of speech, and we still don't know what that looks like yet, the federal government can actually cut research dollars from that institution. So it's interesting to see what's happening. We've got a new head of the House Committee on Education and Labor, Bobby Scott. And one of the things we actually like about Bobby is he has done work on ESSA, and he's done work on school safety and disproportionality in special education. So we're hoping that, you know, what he will do will be bringing some good news to the higher education community and to teacher education. So how many of you have been able to come to Washington Week? Do you know what Washington Week is? So this is an opportunity that AACTE offers to have an opportunity to bring students in to actually advocate at the federal level. Can you tell me what are some issues that are in your states right now in terms of legislation? Are any of you dealing with EdTPA, or any of you dealing with legislation around any other program assessment? Can you just give me some sense of what you've got going? Do you follow the legislation in your state? Okay, good. I thought you did. All right, so help me. What are some of the things that you see happening in your states? Third grade reading laws? You want to tell us more about that? Okay. Others? A push for more dyslexia training. What does that look like? Okay. And what state are you from? Georgia. So is the legislature trying to infuse that into the colleges and universities and the prep programs, or is that, yes? Okay. Yes? Yep. Yep. Yeah, we've actually been monitoring that. That's a good one. Yes? Academic credit for out-of-school religious education. Okay. Yes? Yeah, Kentucky's one of the states we've been watching because you've really had a flip Kentucky historically has been a very proactive state with regard to higher education and teacher education. And so you've really done a 180 around governmental support. And what? Promoting charter schools, right. Others, yes. Right, they might be at a different tier, but they're still going into the classroom without any training in pedagogy or anything else that we would be teaching in our programs. Right. Yeah, I was at the chief state school officers meeting, and one of the chiefs looked at me and said, well, what do you expect me to do? We have a teaching shortage. And I said, yeah, but why would you put individuals into a classroom who don't know how to teach, only to then turn around and lose them and harm the students in the process? One more. Anyone from Connecticut? Connecticut right now, so this is an interesting story. This is how fickle some of this is. There were 2 students at an institution in Connecticut who decided they didn't like EdTPA, and they, with a faculty member, actually wrote to a state legislator. Now there's a bill in the Connecticut General Assembly. Now, Connecticut's been a state that's been moving through EdTPA for quite a long time now. There's a bill in the General Assembly to eliminate EdTPA and to have each institution develop their own performance assessment. So the reason I bring all this up is because the piece around advocacy and your engagement with advocacy is actually incredibly important. These bills kind of come through the states, and the states are where it's happening, especially with ESSA now being much more focused on the states. So how you think about advocacy and working with, if you have and you should have an AACTE state chapter, many of them are engaged in doing this kind of work at the state level. So I would really encourage you to work with them and to know more about what they're doing. And our Washington Week is an opportunity for those of you who can to come and advocate with us. So these are just some pictures from Day on the Hill. I was saying I realized I wore the same outfit that day too, so you could recognize me. So the photo is over there is on the bus, and those are with our Home Scholars. And our Home Scholars is our program at AACTE that brings in students who are underrepresented by virtue of race and ethnicity into the profession, particularly doctoral level students. And then I'm with actually the head of the state chapter from Georgia. So we go to the Hill every year and we lobby, and it's those students who actually make a difference in terms of meeting with elected officials. Strategic partnerships I wanted to talk about a little bit. We're working with 10 institutions right now on a project that's looking at how do we bring more African American and Latino Hispanic men into the profession. We're also doing, we'll be working with institutions around the country to look at special education in a network improved community. We're doing some interesting work with the American Council on Education and the College Football Playoff Foundation. And what we're doing there is we're actually bringing in student athletes into teaching. So for those of you who are working with student athletes, you know it isn't the easiest population to work with because of the demands on their time, but we're doing this coordination between ACE, AACTE, and the College Football Playoff Foundation to bring in teachers from athletic programs. And then with the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, we're looking at the NTASC standards and also thinking about ways to work with them in a network-improved community in special education. So I don't know if these are necessarily new trends, but I wanted to talk a little bit about some of these. So how many of you actually incorporate neuroscience into the work that you do in, yep, I got a hand. So the capacity that we have to understand the brain and the capacity we have to understand children and their brain development is really becoming much more of an emphasis with us. There was a day when I actually visited Butler University, and I went to their lab school, and there was a young man who had just been called out because he had had this interesting and not very positive interaction with a classmate. And when his instructor, and I watched this, when an instructor said, you know, what happened, he said, you know, I realized that my amygdala was firing. And, you know, I know that the next time, I mean, this kid was 8. And I know the next time I need to do this, this, and this. You know, and as I watched that lab school and watched kids, you know, there were no rows, there was lots of play, there were different ways that the kids were engaging in movement. Having a space like that where neuroscience is really a part and parcel of how kids understand themselves is incredibly important. And I don't know if you know this, but Butler University every year has an educational neuroscience symposium. And so if you're interested in learning more about their work, I would suggest that you talk with the folks at Butler University. Design learning. I just left a whole conference that was focused on design learning, which I think is so fascinating because, you know, we're in a world where right now we're being told, what are the quantitative data to prove that, right? Your teachers are effective, your students are learning, et cetera, et cetera. When design thinking is almost the opposite, right? It's the way of showing empathy and having this kind of intuitive sense of what we need to do and allowing for failure and moving through those kinds of designs to think about what is possible. And so I've been looking a lot at the work that's being done at Stanford, right? And looking at learner-centered learning, working with Education Reimagined. So there's a lot that's happening in design learning. And then finally, competency-based education. Are there any institutions in the room that are doing competency-based education at all? Kind of, in Michigan? Okay. It's, you know, one of the things that I am doing right now is I'm actually on the advisory board of Western Governors University's Teachers College. And one of the reasons that I'm doing that is because I want to be able to learn both about the span of competency-based education as well as its delivery online. And so, you know, thinking about how CBE is going to impact teacher education, I think is really important as well. A lot of the K-12 schools, actually in 48 states, have adopted policies to promote competency-based education. So thinking about that and multiple ways to demonstrate proficiency. So I want to show you now a video. One of the things that David didn't talk about, I don't think, is that he's chair of the Committee on Innovation and Technology in AACTE, and we had an award winner this year from the University of Central Arkansas, and it was for its iPad mobile learning initiative. And so here is the Associate Dean talking about that initiative.
My entire professional life has been empowering kids to let them show what they know in multiple ways and giving them access to do that. I really wanted to put the learning in their hands as much as possible. And I really wanted them to have options in what they could show me. So back when I started teaching, we didn't have a lot of technology. But since the iPads have come along, I've really been able to open up avenues and options for kids. We've been doing a lot of technology with our undergraduates, trying to get rid of our textbooks and instead moving everything into the iPad and our own authoring of tools. And now I work with teacher educators and faculty of teacher educators in my current position to really explore those ideas about the teacher letting go of the front of the classroom and really moving into the learning with the students and empowering them to drive their own learning. I'm the data queen for the College of Education, and we have built a lot of data collection points around the one-to-one initiative. I particularly like working with the writers the teachers identify as struggling, because often the struggle is not their ability to come up with really creative, expressive ideas. The physical demands of writing are really where it hangs them up. So using digital storytelling with kids or iPad text-to-speech options or video options really frees up their creativity and gives them access to writing. So we actually got the first set of iPads within the College of Education for the Bears Right kids, and we started using the iPads with them immediately. The most powerful project has been the Erasmus project that we did about 3 summers ago. We're going to bring it back this summer.
At Bears Right, we used iPads to take lots of pictures and videos on our field trips for digital stories, and we used Erasmus to tell our biographies. It was so cool. My parents even got to see what we did on the iPads. I could be creative with my writing.
So they've been doing some really incredible work. I would encourage you to talk with David and see about how your program could be considered for the award for AACTE 2020. So I want to just move into a little bit about the belief in education and the work that we do. And, you know, in my opinion, this work that we do is actually at the foundation of our democracy. We can't have a fully democratic society, a liberal democracy, if we don't have an educated citizenry. And part of what that involves is looking at what we're doing as well as what our colleagues in other countries are doing, right? We need to have some perspective about what's happening globally. We've been doing a lot of work with deans around the country. We'll be working with deans at AERA if you're there. To mention Butler University again, they won our Global Network for Teacher Preparation. They won for that program, they won an award. And we need to think about for a moment, what are our obligations to positively impact K-12 education? So I want you to do me a favor. If you could pull out your phones, because I know some of you, I know most of you have them, and I want you to go to your photos, and I want you to then flip it so that you're taking a selfie, but then I want you to go to video. And I want you to take 30 seconds right now and talk about, seriously, videotape yourselves, why it is that you do what you do in education. Remind yourselves why you went into this field. Take 30 seconds now and videotape yourselves, please. Go ahead, I can see you doing it. It's good, it'll remind you why you do the work you do. Why are you doing this? You're not getting paid a ton of money. You're not getting a ton of respect on any given day. You're fighting for resources. Why are you still doing this work? Anyone want to share what they said, why you're still doing the work? I hear a lot of laughter. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Why do you still do what you do? What is it about education that makes the work so powerful? Anyone? Yes, Teresa. So the ripple effect that we see that, right? I mean, I don't know about any of you, but I'm still in touch with my high school phys ed teacher and coach. I still think about those moments where, you know, she really pushed me, and I think that some of the things that she taught me when I was a kid in high school still impact today. That's the ripple effect, and then when I teach, it's the same thing, right? What else? Why else do you keep doing what you're doing? Because, my friend from Michigan, yes. Oh, education is the business of hope. Tell us what you say that. So tell me again the phrase, education. Education is the business of hope. Okay, thank you. What else? One more. Brave soul. Yes. Because kids deserve an education. Yeah. Thank you, my friend from Kentucky. You know, I spent a lot of time working in higher education, and I would often hear people say, oh, you know, what's happening to students who are coming to us as though there was some separation between us and the K-12 system. And there's not. You know, I mean, I think we are the ones in teacher education and in colleges of education that integrate those seemingly separate silos. But you're right, every kid does deserve an education. And because those kids deserve it, and candidly, I think because our country deserves it. We can't move forward as a nation without those educated citizens. And so thanks for sharing that. And do me a favor and just keep that selfie and remember it. I want to tell you a story now about this teacher. Her name is Tammy Waddell. And she taught elementary school in Forsyth County in Georgia. And literally, last summer, she learned she had colon cancer. And she made one final request before she died. She said, please don't bring flowers to my funeral. Bring backpacks full of school supplies to be given to needy children. The people responded, as you can see by the photo, by bringing over 100 jam-packed backpacks. Her cousin wrote, quote, her final lesson was to be of service to others, a last lesson well taught, a teacher to the end. I want you to remember Tammy's story when you look at your selfie video, and remember the ways in which we are selfless in seeking to make sure that our children are taken care of. So here was someone who transformed, right, what could have been a very sad ending into a selfless beginning. Some might say she was a textbook example of grace. But at the same time, doesn't it make you a little angry that she had to ask this? How many teachers do we know that are putting their own resources into classrooms around the country? How many times do you do that with your students? Maybe an end of semester party that you decide that you want to help them celebrate an achievement, right? So part of what our challenge is, I think, as a profession is how do we convince students to come into our profession when we have some of these more challenging stories? I would say that they should look at your selfies, because that's why we do it. And I think together what we can do is we actually can raise the prestige and visibility of the profession. Now, understand and appreciate that this isn't the easiest thing to do, and now I am going to actually take you to a poll, because I think I've got it working. So open your browsers, please. And go to slido.com. And you're going to enter the code #site19. And here's the question. much did the top 5 tech giants spend to lobby the U.S. government last year? Okay. You're absolutely right. 64.1 million. How much do you think we spent on lobbying the federal government? I could tell you, it's all right, I could dance. I could tell you how much AACTE spends, and it's not even $1 million. You know, and I know there's us and there's other folks and combined, but there is no way, right? So when you talk about an uphill battle in terms of advocacy, this is something that is pretty significant. Public education doesn't have these resources. And so it's up to us to make sure that we are putting our stories out there. You know, and one of the other things I was going to ask you to do, but I don't want to oversell for you this morning, but to think about how you talk about this work with external stakeholders. How you engage in that advocacy is incredibly important. Now, I mentioned nurses earlier, and it's really interesting because there's been a whole campaign called Nursing Now. It's been a 3-year campaign, and they are doing this to promote the profession in partnership with the World Health Organization and the International Council of Nurses. And so part of what we've been doing at AACTE is talking to other like-minded organizations to see if we can do a teaching now. Because there hasn't been enough emphasis put on how it is that we need to bring in more teachers, value public education, and candidly bring in a collective. Because what we know as teacher educators is that the best teachers are catalysts for the future, right? They instill values, they spark imaginations, they build character, and they shape lives. So, in closing, you tell me, where might we find the best minds in education and technology to start brainstorming and creating this national campaign? Right here. Exactly. All of you. I know you've been there all along, and I know you'll continue to be there. On behalf of AACTE, thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. I'm sorry the Slido didn't always work as well as it could, but at least we got the big $64 million question answered. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the follow-up session.